everybody, and welcome to Wise Exotics. I hope everybody's doing well. This is a new video series called How to Grow Nepenthes. This is a video series geared for those who are newer or thinking of getting started in this hobby. Now, if you've stumbled on this and you're a veteran, or you have your own collection, or maybe you're just curious and this is interesting, whatever the case, I hope this helps you along your path. Maybe it gives you a little bit of an idea, or maybe makes you think about wanting to try to grow some of these. Whatever the case, I hope you have good luck and carry forth. If anybody has comments or questions and wishes them to be covered in the next video, or wants me to talk about certain things in the next video of this type, please list them below in the comment section. You can always chat with me if you're new or having problems and struggling and wanting some help. I can try to give you some advice. Talk with me on Instagram. I'm Wise Exotic, one word, same little green owl as my YouTube. I'm usually there and will answer requests or direct messages as often as I can. I'm still recovering from cancer chemo treatments from last year, so hopefully I'll be back in shape and capable soon. For now, it's when I can, I will try. So to start, what are Nepenthes? Nepenthes are carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants typically exist and have evolved in areas that have very draining soil, very poor nutritional quality, lots of very clean water. So all those are aspects to keep in mind. First thing I would always recommend you do is, if you're looking at a Nepenthes to have in your collection, Google it. Search whatever search engine is good, Bing, Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever floats your boat. Whatever works for you, start searching up that plant species, learn about it, figure out where it's from, what's its environment like, what is that environment like around the year, does it get storms, do they get typhoons, things like that. You have to take that into effect, because some of these plants like cooler, maybe some warm rain at certain sections of the year. Some will grow during cooler or warmer times. You'll get different things at different types, different elevations, etc. So highly recommend to always do some research on a plant before you buy it. That's my big thing. Now, as an example of Nepenthes, we'll look at this one. Nepenthes grow usually from moss or as epiphytes in trees, which is moss in trees or moss and whatnot on the ground. Typically, they have black roots that are very thin, similar to this really thin string that's coming out here. This is not actually root. This is part of the moss setup. But this is a good example of what the roots are. Very thin, very stringy, and black. Now, that doesn't mean they're rotted. They do have black roots. That is typical of Nepenthes. So as they develop, they'll have a growth tip. The growth tip is this. It will pop, and a leaf opens, and then a new growth tip will bend out and move and go to the next section. Usually they like to do a star pattern, I've noticed. Like that. They always like to go opposing of their current spot. Sometimes they'll rotate and do different, but they try to keep themselves varied so their leaves are not covering the leaf below, so they still get sunlight from that leaf. As the leaves grow, they'll develop a tendril. At the end of the tendril are these little nodes. Now these nodes have an embryo, as you can see, this little brown little thing. That embryo will inflate over time and develop into a pitcher. These pitchers are traps. These are how they hunt and gain the nutrition that their soil lacks. At the tip up here is a transparent lid, semi-transparent I should say. As you can see under these lids here, there's light goes through. Some of these are spotted and whatnot. This is a technique that's used in quite a variety of carnivorous plants. Basically, the lid shines light. If a bug falls in by accident or happenstance, tries to fly out, they will usually go toward a light source. So those with spots usually makes them think that's a escape route. So they'll fly up and hit the lid, bounce back in, and get trapped inside of these sticky enzymes that digest them. Some Nepenthes have very watery enzymes in their stomach of their peristome, or inside the trap, as it's normally called. Some are very viscous and almost like glue. I think it was Nepenthes jamban. You can look it up. They look like little drums, but inside it's almost like a viscous glue. You put your finger in it, it will just stick to you. So, but they are also very open peristomes, so that might be how they adapted to trap their prey without needing to have other tricks. Now, most Nepenthes also secrete a nectar. This nectar will make the air around you kind of smell fresh and a little sweet. That's the best way I can describe it. Kind of like honey in the air, like a very weak wild honey. Bugs that ingest this, or their prey that ingest this, will get dizzy, drunk, and fall in. They are not like other carnivorous plants that are like Venus flytraps that are very well known to do this, that have a mechanism of hairs inside their traps. These are very passive. They don't do anything. They let the bugs do it themselves. You fell in, it's not my fault type of thing. But, I'm not going to say no to a meal type of plant. Now, these plants are broken up into varying zones. These zones are very important to understand. That is one of the big keys I will state here. This does not mean you can't grow all four. I'm obviously growing all four in varying ways and species types. I'm even growing some of the more difficult ones. This is because my location that I grow these at is very convenient for growing Nepenthes, and it checks all the boxes for most of these for some unknown reason. I know why it does it for those two. These two, question marks, but I believe I have a hypothesis on that. Anywho, Nepenthes Section 1, Lowland. Nepenthes Section 2, Intermediate. Nepenthes Section 3, Highland. Nepenthes Section 4, Ultra Highland. I know that sounds very edgy to say ultra, but that is actually what they are called, an ultra highland zone. Now, these zones vary in range in elevation. So say from sea level to mountaintop. Some of these are found on cliff faces, as an example. Now, that's not to say you can't grow them all in one area, but it might be easier if you're a starting new person to focus on what type best fits your environment naturally. When I started, I focused on the one that seemed to fit my environment because I got a few, and one type seemed to be happier than the others. So I started developing from that as a base and spread out, and then I adjusted and was able to grow the other zones. So keep that in mind. Now, the first thing I would recommend you do is, if you're just starting and you have no idea what your setup can do, find a location, usually by an eastern facing window. As long as the window gets a certain amount of light per day, usually about 12 hours of light is typical. Some can go 14. You will want to also get a TDS meter, which is this little handy device. You will also want to get a thermostat or temperature monitoring sensor, either one that connects to your phone or some other device, so you can watch and monitor so you get an idea of what can fit there. And the reason for that is to give you an idea of what plant might like that setup initially. It's not that you can't adjust it, it's just that this might be easier if you're starting. So typically lowland Nepenthes, which is zone 1, are very, at sea level, on the ground, or maybe slightly epiphytical in a tree. They typically like warm environments with lots of light, and they grow fast. These are usually the faster growing of the Nepenthes. That's not to say there can't be a weird one, or the odd joker in the deck that is very virulent and grows very fast and is versatile and very hardy in these other ones, but this is a typical of a species thing, okay? So lowland, warm environment, high humidity. These are usually really good in warmer greenhouses or indoors or on windowsills. A lot of people like to grow them. I actually have a lot of problems growing most of these when I started that are lowland. So I started in a different zone. Next zone we will classify as intermediate. Intermediate can kind of go into zone 1 and zone 3. So they have a lot of wiggle room. That's not to say that zone 1 can't wiggle into intermediate like this, but typically we're just going to lock them into different zones. Some species and even hybrids will have a lot of play where they can be in, and that's something to keep in mind. Even species have variance depending on what elevation where they were found. So in zone 2, we have intermediate. This is a Nepenthes veitchii. Veitchii can be found in highland, lowland, intermediate, in all different locations. They're very hardy. I'm labeling this as intermediate just to give an idea. That's not to say that this specific variant or species is intermediate. The next zone is highland. Highland and the next zone, ultra highland, are both very hard for most people to start. And the reason for that is their environmental conditions. One of the key factors of the highlands and ultra highlands to keep in mind, temperature drop. Every night they require, almost religiously, a nice drop in temperatures. This can vary from 5 degrees to 20 degrees. It depends on the species and where they're found. Now, I have these growing in a glass room in various setups. So this is a window setup, open air. I have fancy little light bulbs. I have little LEDs that are up above and underneath each of these and above each of these trays. I have a tank setup, which is also very handy to do, and those are in lights. That's all it has. Are those two lights and that single spotlight. They're not a lot. The lights are 5 volts. The spotlight, I think, is 10 volts or watts. They're not really super pricey or super strong. What they do is provide high amounts of diffused full spectrum light. Now, Nepenthes are found underneath trees or in tree ranges or in cliffs. It's varied through species, but most of them like diffused light, but they like full spectrum. So it's kind of a conundrum. You have to give them a lot of light without it being too intense or too like a focused beam. So it needs to be very spread out light. So a lot of people get LEDs and whatnot. You can try reflectors or mirrors to just catch extra light. That's actually what those little metal things are for, just to let the light bounce there and get that. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't hurt or do anything. Keep that in mind. So for a tank setup, you get an old fish tank. This is a 55-gallon tank. I stuck trays. I stuck plants, and then I bought an acrylic top from a place called Tap Plastic. They cut and shape or form acrylics to needs, and I gave them the measurement, and it clicks on that lid. I found initially I would keep it closed. I started developing mold because I didn't have good air circulation. So I keep this lid mostly cracked about a small amount that lets the air circulate throughout this setup and prevents mold, and the plants actually seem to like it a little better. The humidity in here is usually 90%. The varying range is 60 to about 85. And I have ultra highlands in here, lowlands, and intermediates, all in a variety of places. But I keep my ultras on the right, which is usually cooler, and my lowlands and intermediates are more toward the left here. So they get a little warmer and a little more intense light. That light gives them a gap on the ones that didn't like it. The ones that liked it, I moved toward the middle. I am constantly shifting my plants around in both setups to try to figure out where they like, because some like a lot of light, some need a lot of light, some like shadier, darker areas. As an example, Sibulinensis here, which is a species of highland. They live in very darker areas, very cooler, so it seems to be much happier over here, as an example. Now, something you can tell from the leaves here, some Nepenthes will develop a kind of film, and you might be wondering what that is. It's almost like a waxy substance. It's basically their form of sunscreen. It's a defense against too much light or too dry of an air sometimes. That's a hint. Most of these plants will give what I call indicators, stressors or stress indicators that you can pick up on as their owner and try to adjust the setup accordingly. So typically what you do if you're going to have these plants, you'll get a tray with water and you let the plants soak the water from the roots up. That's how they work. Now, I do not recommend fully leaving them in water. What I do is I have a tray with what are called eggshell crates. You can pick these up from saltwater places that sell saltwater fish, or Lowe's, Home Depot. Any place that has ceiling tile typically has them, and you can cut them to shape. It's very simple. It's very easy. Now I also have a humidifier here. This is a Humvana. This creates a big foggy mist for my open air setup, which is why I usually don't really have to water this so often. The fog keeps them humid, and it usually provides just enough humidity to keep them from being waterlogged, but keep them happy. That's not to say this is the only way. What some people do is they will spray them every morning with a spray bottle. Some will even use little misters. I've tried a variety of things. Usually I might mist them with some fertilizer and whatnot, mixed in, usually using my TDS meter to get the ratio I want. Now, the night drops are the big problem for these two for most people, so keep that in mind. If you have success growing these, that means you should be able to grow the other two no problem, but you have to keep in mind that they might take longer to acclimate and they will go slower because of the cooler temperatures, so keep that in mind. This does not always work, but this is the method I've found, is you just take a little longer to acclimate the lowland or intermediates in a cooler setup. Highland possibly, and ultra highland could possibly go in a warmer setup for the same reason. I don't have the capacity to try that, nor do I want to. Now, there are Nepenthes that are very expensive, that are very costly. sometimes it might be easier to start with the intermediate and cheaper ones just to figure out your range. Not everybody can jump into the deep end, okay? Stay in the kiddie pool, get your setup kind of acclimated, and slowly build up and spread from there to the more exotic or one you might desire. When I was starting, one of the Nepenthes I really wanted to get was a Nepenthes diabolica. I do have one now, and I'm very happy to say she's growing very healthily. Now, it took me a while to get my setup to where that plant was happy, or I could get one of those that was going to survive. I have one growing fine. It took me a while to get my setup to that range, and I was very thankful when I got that plant. And it's been growing savvy since. Now, we talked about the TDS meter. An aspect of growing these plants is you need clean water. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be extremely purified to the ends of the earth degree, boiled and reverse osmosis, then distilled. You can typically take this meter, and if it's at like 135, under 140, it should be fine. I've seen plenty of people do that. Some tap water is really good. Some well water is really good. Some people use rainwater or snow. Snow and rainwater will have hydrogen peroxide mixed in with it, which is good to remove bacteria. If you're thinking about adding that in for yourself, do it in very diluted amounts because too much hydrogen peroxide can scorch your leaves. But it is a natural treatment for root rot in various plants, including Nepenthes. I have tried it. If you have problems with that and you'd like to discuss with me, feel free to message me or post in the comments, and I'll try to help. I know what I did, and it's worked on at least 3 plants so far that are very critical. Now, for those of you who are thinking of doing this and you want to do fertilizer method, not feeding them live prey or hand feeding each of these, typically what you'll do is you'll get like Max C seaweed fertilizer diluted in water. I usually put it to about 50 TDS in my water. My water is at 0.003 typically because it is from a local store that dilutes and makes really clean water, so I buy it at cheap amounts. Anyway, you dilute it to about 50 and you just spray it maybe once or twice every month, and that seems to keep my plants happy if I do that. I also have birdseed in here that has, birdseed. Birdseed that has fly and moth larvae that grow from that, and they fly around this room. Typically, those will also feed my Nepenthes because they just insta-get eaten. So the Nepenthes are very good passive hunters, so keep that in mind. It's actually quite amazing to watch them just quickly get a fly. It will be in here, and it'll just go straight to them, get in, and never come out. So there's that. Now, you might be wondering, what are some media types you can use to grow these plants? There is Akadama that I would recommend for highlands and ultra highlands. It's very good for draining and helps develop roots really well for those species. There's perlite that you can mix in with Akadama. You can also use it with sphagnum moss and perlite. And I'm trying to remember what the other moss is. Peat moss. So you can do peat moss or sphagnum moss. Long fiber sphagnum moss chopped up usually seems to be the safe bet that everybody goes with. And then they'll throw a bunch of perlite in there just to let the roots have zones they can grab onto and anchor to, as well as helping it be a better drainage system. You don't want to keep these plants waterlogged. Now, as I said, lighting isn't a big deal. Usually you can get away with anything that has full spectrum and somewhat diffused lighting. Water is major key here. Feeding them or having a way to feed them doesn't always have to be the only way. Sometimes I don't even feed these plants and they grow fine. The main aspect here is to make sure that they're getting enough light that helps them to develop. Sometimes giving them fish pellets, fish flakes, old beta fish ones, really tiny, just put it in the pitcher once every month and that's all they need. Now, if you have a lot of plants like me, sometimes the Max C fertilizer spray method is faster to grow and feed all these plants at once. As I said, I typically don't feed mine. They just usually grow off the light or maybe a bug or two that grows off of the bird food, but that's about it. Now, is there anything else that you could do to make these plants more successful? Nothing really comes to mind. Lighting and shifting around, trying to find where they're happy is a big aspect. Watch the leaves, watch how the plants, if the plant's starting to turn toward the light, that means it's trying to get a little more light. The plant will give you indicators, and that is specifically what you need to look for. So this will be the end of episode 1. I hope this is educational and or helps those who need it. Please leave comments or things that might need to be brought up in the next video in the, well, comments. Trevor out. Thanks.